His touch was familiar yet electric, his hands moving over me with a practiced intimacy that still managed to ignite something deep within. The dim glow of the bedside lamp cast soft shadows across the room as Daniel leaned closer, his lips brushing mine with a gentleness that always caught me off guard. I tilted my head back, my fingers tracing the muscles of his back as he kissed my neck, each touch erasing the distance that had crept between us over the years. Our bodies moved together, a rhythm we had perfected over time. Yet tonight there was something different. An urgency, perhaps, or a vulnerability I hadn't noticed before. As I clung to him, losing myself in the heat of the moment, I felt a flicker of guilt. Guilt for the thoughts I had buried, the fantasies I had dared to imagine. But Daniel's whispers, his touch, pulled me back to him, if only for now. His movements grew more purposeful, his hands trailing over my skin with a mix of reverence and hunger. I could feel his pulse quicken as he leaned into me, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was both tender and demanding. The room seemed to shrink around us, the dim lights softening the edges of reality until it was just Lucas and me, tangled together in a fleeting illusion of intimacy. I matched his rhythm, letting my body respond to his touch, every sigh and murmur perfectly calculated to draw him farther into my grasp. He whispered my name like a prayer, his voice husky and raw, and I allowed a moment of vulnerability to seep into my gaze. It wasn't real, of course, but Lucas didn't know that. His hands tightened on my hips, pulling me closer, as though he could anchor me to this moment, to him. I arced against him, letting the heat of his body melt mine, the friction between us building into a crescendo that felt inevitable. I could feel his devotion in every movement, his complete surrender, and I fed off it, knowing it was all I needed to seal my plans. Lucas let out a cry, and then it was over. Lucas wrapped his arms around me, holding me as though I might vanish if he let go. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, my lips curving into a faint smile he couldn't see. He thought he had given me everything, but in truth, he had nothing left to give. I'd taken it all, his trust, his loyalty, his love, and turned it into my weapon. Tomorrow, he'd wake to a world that no longer included me. But tonight, I let him believe the lie for just a little longer. It was the least I could do. I stared at the ceiling, my heart still racing, wondering if he could sense the storm brewing inside me. I loved him, I truly did, but there was a part of me that longed for something else, something unknown, something forbidden. It started the next day, a conversation that changed everything. We were sitting in the living room, sipping wine after putting our daughter to bed. I don't know what compelled me to say it, but the words slipped out before I could stop them. Have you ever been tempted by someone else? I asked, keeping my tone light, but feeling the weight of the question. Daniel hesitated. his expression unreadable. "No," he said finally, though his voice betrayed a hint of doubt. "Why? Have you?" I laughed it off, but the question lingered in the air like smoke. The truth was, I had been tempted. There was a man, a stranger I'd encountered months ago on a trip, whose presence had awakened something in me. I had never acted on it, but the memory of that brief unspoken connection haunted me in ways I couldn't explain. That conversation planted a seed, and over the following days, it grew. Daniel seemed more distant, preoccupied with his work as a doctor. I, in turn, became more introspective, questioning everything about our life together. We made love after an argument. He had come home late, his mood tense, and we had exchanged sharp words in the kitchen. But somewhere between anger and apology, the fire reignited. He kissed me hard, his hands gripping my waist as he pressed me against the counter. The intensity of his touch was different from before, less controlled, more primal. I responded in kind, matching his urgency as our breaths mingled, the argument forgotten in the heat of the moment. We didn't make it to the bedroom. The cold surface of the countertop against my back only heightened the sensation of his warmth. His weight pressing against me as he buried his face in my neck. It was wild, passionate, and almost desperate, as though we were trying to prove something to each other, to ourselves. His hands roamed over my body with a feverish intensity, as though he was trying to erase every sharp word we had exchanged. My fingers gripped his shoulders, pulling him closer, my breaths coming fast and shallow as his lips traveled down my neck. The contrast between the cold countertop beneath me and the heat of his body sent a shiver through me, amplifying every sensation. He leaned back for a moment, his eyes dark with a mix of desire and frustration, before pulling me forward, our bodies meeting in perfect electric sync. The kitchen around us faded into the background. The only sounds were the ragged rhythm of our breathing and the occasional creak of the counter beneath us. His movements were forceful, his hands gripping my hips as though he was afraid I might slip away. I wrapped my legs around him, holding him to me, my head tilting back as a wave of pleasure coursed through me. There was a rawness to it, a kind of vulnerability masked by the sheer physicality of what we were sharing, and it left me breathless. This time, I was the one to let out a loud cry at the end. We stayed where we were, his forehead resting against mine as we caught our breath. His hands lingered on my waist, his touch gentler now, almost apologetic. I reached up to trace his jawline with my fingertips, my heart still racing. The tension between us had dissipated, replaced by something softer, something that felt almost like understanding. But deep down, I knew this fragile peace wouldn't last. It never did. I stayed in his arms longer than usual, savoring the closeness, even as my mind wandered. The passion between us was real, but it couldn't quiet the whispers of doubt that had taken root. In the days that followed, Daniel grew restless. He didn't tell me where he went late at night, and I didn't ask. I could feel the distance between us growing, and I wondered if my question had planted doubts in him as well. One night, I caught him staring at me across the dinner table, his expression unreadable. "Are you happy?" he asked suddenly. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I think so," I said finally, though the words felt hollow. Daniel nodded, but the tension in the air remained. I didn't know it then, but he had already begun his own journey into the shadows of desire. One that would challenge everything we thought we knew about ourselves, about each other. As the secrets began to unravel, I realized that the distance between us wasn't just a product of my fantasies or his silence. It was something deeper, something darker, lurking just beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect life.